The first gunshot echoed through Skidoo like the devil's own knock, sending folks scurrying for cover as Xander Byrne rode down Main Street, his shadow long and menacing in the dying light of a Nevada sunset in 1878. The locals called him the ghost behind his back, though never to his face if they valued their lives. Not a single soul could recall when he'd first arrived in their dusty mining town, only that misfortune seemed to follow in his wake, clinging to him like the permanent layer of trail dust on his black duster. Zara Ellis watched from the window of her father's general store, her breath fogging the glass as the most feared man in Skidoo dismounted his massive midnight stallion. Unlike the others who cowered at his approach, she studied him with curious eyes. She'd only been in town 3 weeks, having arrived from Boston to help her ailing father with his business after her mother's passing. And already she'd heard enough whispered tales about Xander Byrne to fill a dime novel. "Get away from that window, Zara," her father hissed, his voice trembling as he limped across the wooden floor. "That man's trouble, pure trouble." Zara stepped back, smoothing down her practical blue dress. "He's just a man, father. Everyone speaks of him like he's some kind of demon." "Might as well be," Harold Ellis muttered, his rheumy eyes darting nervously toward the door. 6 men dead by his gun, they say, maybe more. Nobody crosses him in lives to tell about it. The shop bell jingled, and both Ellis family members froze as the door swung open. Xander Byrne ducked his head to enter, his 6'3" frame filling the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, giving his otherwise handsome face an asymmetrical, dangerous quality. Harold Ellis shuffled forward, visibly trembling. "Mr. Byrne, sir, what can I help you with today?" Xander's pale blue eyes cold as winter ice, Zara thought scanned the store's interior before settling on her father. "Coffee, ammunition, bacon." His voice was low and rough, like he didn't use it often. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Harold moved with surprising speed for a man with a bad hip, gathering the requested items. Zara remained where she stood, suddenly aware that Xander Byrne was studying her. Unlike the other townspeople, she didn't lower her gaze. Instead, she met his eyes steadily, noting the surprise that flickered briefly across his face. "You're new," he stated, more observation than question. "I arrived 3 weeks ago," she replied, her Boston accent still pronounced despite her efforts to soften it. "I'm Zara Ellis." Her father nearly dropped the can of coffee he was holding. No one engaged Xander Byrne in conversation unless absolutely necessary. But Zara wasn't afraid, or at least she was determined not to show it. There was something in the man's eyes beyond the coldness, something that spoke of deep wounds and deeper loneliness. And then, without planning to, Zara smiled at him. A genuine smile that reached her eyes, not the nervous grimace most people offered him. Xander Byrne went completely still, like a predator that had encountered something unexpected on the hunt. For a brief moment, something in his expression softened, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. "That'll be $2.45, Mr. Byrne," Harold said, breaking the strange moment. Xander placed the coins on the counter, his eyes still on Zara. He nodded once, put his hat back on, and left without another word. "Have you lost your mind?" Harold whispered furiously once the door closed. "You don't speak to him, you don't smile at him, you don't even look at him." "Why not?" Zara asked, watching through the window as Xander secured his purchases to his saddle. "He's just a customer." "He's a killer, Zara, a cold-blooded killer." Harold's hands were shaking. "Promise me you'll stay clear of him." Zara said nothing, her eyes following Xander Byrne as he rode out of town, straight-backed and solitary. There was a story there, she was certain, and despite her father's warnings, she found herself wanting to know what it was. The next morning, Zara was arranging a new shipment of fabric when Sheriff Miller entered the store. A portly man with a perpetually worried expression, he nodded to Harold before approaching the counter. "Miss Ellis," he said, twisting his hat in his hands, "I heard about your interaction with Byrne yesterday." Zara sighed, setting down a bolt of calico. "News travels fast in Skidu." "It's a small town," the sheriff replied, "and when it comes to Xander Byrne, folks take notice." "It was hardly an interaction, Sheriff. I simply introduced myself." Sheriff Miller leaned closer, lowering his voice though the store was empty save for the three of them. "Miss Ellis, I don't think you understand. Xander Byrne isn't just any troublemaker. 3 years ago, he gunned down the Blackwell brothers in the street, all three of them. Before that, he was a hired gun for the mining companies during the labor disputes. Man's got ice water in his veins." "Then why isn't he in jail?" Zara asked, crossing her arms. The sheriff's face reddened. "Nothing I can prove." "Witnesses have a way of forgetting what they saw when Byrne's involved, or disappearing altogether." He cleared his throat. "I'm just saying, a young woman like yourself, new to the West, it's best not to draw his attention." After the sheriff left, Zara's father reinforced the warning, extracting a reluctant promise from her to keep her distance from the mysterious gunslinger. But fate had other plans. 3 days later, Zara was returning from delivering a package to Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker, when she heard angry voices from the alley beside the Silver Dollar Saloon. Curiosity getting the better of her, she peered around the corner. Xander Byrne stood with his back against the wall, facing 3 men whose stances screamed trouble. She recognized one as Tom Dolly, the foreman from the Consolidated Mine. The other 2 were strangers, but the matching deputy badges on their vests suggested they weren't local lawmen. "Time's up, Byrne," one of the deputies said, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "Mr. Johnston wants you gone, permanently." Xander's expression remained impassive. "Tell Johnston I'll leave when I'm good and ready." The second deputy spat tobacco juice near Xander's boot. "You ain't in a position to negotiate, 3 against 1, Tom Dolly sneered. "Even the great Xander Byrne can't beat those odds." What happened next occurred so quickly that Zara would later struggle to piece it together. Xander moved like lightning, drawing his gun and firing in one fluid motion. The first deputy went down clutching his shoulder. The second managed to pull his weapon, but received a bullet to the thigh for his efforts. Tom Dolly didn't even get his gun clear of its holster before Xander's pistol was pressed against his forehead. "Tell Johnston," Xander said, his voice deadly quiet, "that the next messenger he sends won't be walking back." He stepped back, holstering his gun with practiced ease, then noticed Zara standing at the mouth of the alley. Their eyes met, and something like regret flashed across his face before the mask of indifference slid back into place. Zara should have been terrified. She had just witnessed this man shoot 2 people without hesitation. But instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of certainty that he wouldn't have harmed her, even if she'd been standing in the deputy's place. Before she could process this bizarre revelation, Tom Dolly spotted her. "Look at that, Byrne," he laughed nervously, backing away. "You've got a witness now. Town schoolmarm saw the whole thing." "I'm not the schoolmarm," Zara said automatically. "I work at the general store." Xander glanced at the wounded deputies, then back at her. "Go home, Miss Ellis," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "This isn't your concern." Instead, Zara stepped into the alley. "Those men need medical attention." "Zara," the voice belonged to her father, who appeared behind her, face pale with fear, "come away from there." But Zara was already kneeling beside the deputy with the shoulder wound, using her shawl to staunch the bleeding. "Someone fetch Dr. Simmons," she ordered, her voice calm despite the circumstances. To everyone's surprise, Xander holstered his gun and knelt opposite her. "Press harder," he instructed, guiding her hands to the right position on the wound. The bullet went clean through. Sheriff Miller and several townspeople arrived moments later, drawn by the gunshots. The scene they found was not what anyone expected. Zara Ellis and Xander Byrne working side by side to tend the wounded men. The sheriff's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. "Byrne, step away from her." "It's all right, Sheriff," Zara said, not looking up from her task. "Mr. Byrne is helping." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Xander Byrne, helping? Those words had never been used in the same sentence before. As Dr. Simmons took over care of the wounded deputies, Zara stood, her hands and the front of her dress stained with blood. She looked at Xander, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once, then turned to face the sheriff. "It was self-defense, Miller. They came for me, not the other way around." "We'll sort that out at my office," Miller replied, though with less conviction than usual. His eyes kept darting between Xander and Zara as though trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As Xander was led away, Harold Ellis rushed to his daughter's side. "Are you hurt? Did he threaten you?" "No, father," Zara said, watching Xander's retreating figure. "Quite the opposite, actually." That night, unable to sleep, Zara sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the stars scattered across the Nevada sky. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind not just the violence, but the moment when Xander had guided her hands with unexpected gentleness. The moment when the town's most feared resident had shown a different side of himself. The next morning, whispers followed Zara as she walked to the store. She ignored them, knowing small towns thrived on gossip, but even she was surprised when Widow Jenkins stopped her outside the post office. "Is it true?" the elderly woman asked, her voice hushed. "That you smiled at Xander Byrne and he helped tend those wounded men?" "Yes, madam," Zara replied, wondering why this was causing such a stir. Widow Jenkins shook her head in wonder. "In all the years that man's been in Skidoo, I've never seen him show a lick of concern for anyone, not once." Throughout the day, more townspeople found excuses to visit the general store, each curious about the infamous gunslinger's apparent change in behavior. Zara answered their questions as best she could, though she had no explanation for why Xander had acted as he did. By closing time, she was exhausted from the attention and grateful when her father suggested she take the evening off while he handled the final inventory. The fading sunlight was still warm as she made her way to the small creek that ran behind the town, a peaceful spot she'd discovered during her first week in Skidoo. She was surprised to find someone already there, skipping stones across the water with practiced precision. The broad shoulders and black hat were unmistakable. Zara hesitated, her father's warnings echoing in her mind. But curiosity and something else she wasn't ready to examine propelled her forward. "Mr. Byrne," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and for a moment she thought he might walk away. Instead, he nodded in acknowledgement. "Miss Ellis." She approached, stopping a few feet from him. "I heard the sheriff released you. Even Miller couldn't justify holding me when both deputies admitted they drew first." He selected another flat stone from the creek bed. "Though he made it clear I'm not welcome in his jail or his town, is it true what they say about you?" The question slipped out before she could consider its wisdom. Xander's hand paused mid-throw. "Depends on what they're saying." "That you've killed 6 men, maybe more." He sent the stone skipping across the water 1, 2, 3, 4 bounces before it sank. "It's true." Zara should have been frightened by his matter-of-fact admission, but instead she found herself stepping closer. "Were they all trying to kill you first?" A humorless smile touched his lips. "Asking if they deserved it, I suppose I am." He turned to face her fully, and in the golden light of sunset she noticed flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Would it matter if I said yes?" "It would to me," she replied honestly. For several long moments he studied her as though trying to solve a complex puzzle. Then he sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "Not all of them, no. I was a different man when I first came west." Zara sat on a nearby rock, arranging her skirts around her. "Tell me." To her surprise, he did. Haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, he told her how he'd come to Nevada as a young man of 20, full of ambition but short on options. How he'd discovered he had a talent with a gun that people were willing to pay for. How he'd worked as a hired gun for mining companies, enforcing their will against workers who dared to demand fair treatment. "I didn't ask questions," he said, his voice flat. "Just did the job and collected my pay." "What changed?" Zara asked, sensing there was more to the story. Xander picked up another stone, turning it over in his hands. 5 years ago, I was hired to handle a situation at a small silver mine near Virginia City. The workers were organizing, demanding safer conditions after a collapse killed 3 men. He paused, his jaw tightening. The company wanted to make an example of the ringleader, a man named Michael Cole. He skipped the stone with more force than necessary, sending it clear across the narrow creek. I followed Cole home one night, planning to rough him up enough to send a message, but when I got there, he shook his head. He was reading to his kids. A boy and a girl, maybe 5 and 7 years old. His wife was mending clothes by the fire. Zara remained silent, sensing the importance of allowing him to continue at his own pace. "I couldn't do it," Xander finally said. "Couldn't destroy that family." I told Cole to take his family and leave Nevada that night, then I went back to the mine owner and lied, said the job was done. His voice hardened. 2 days later, I discovered Cole never left. Someone else had been sent to finish the job. They burned the cabin with the whole family inside. Zara gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's when I realized what I'd become part of," Xander continued. "So I hunted down the men responsible, the mine owner and the 2 hired guns who did the actual killing. That's 3 of your 6 right there." His eyes met hers, challenging. "Do they deserve your sympathy?" "No," Zara answered without hesitation. "What about the others, the Blackwell brothers? They were running a protection racket, terrorizing small ranchers outside of town when they burned down the Wilkins place with Mrs. Wilkins still inside. I decided they'd done enough damage," he shrugged. "They came at me 3-1 in the street. They lost." Zara absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the cold-blooded killer of town legend with the man standing before her, a man who had chosen to act as judge, jury, and executioner, but only against those he deemed truly deserving. "Why stay in Skidoo?" she asked finally, "if everyone fears you?" "Because fear keeps people at a distance," he replied simply. "And distance keeps them safe. Safe from what? From me, from the people who might come looking for me." He picked up his hat, signaling an end to the conversation. "It's getting late, Miss Ellis. You should head back to town." As if on cue, they heard Harold Ellis calling his daughter's name in the distance, his voice tinged with panic. "That's my father," Zara said, standing quickly. "He'll be worried." Xander nodded, settling his hat on his head. "Best not mention our conversation. Your reputation in town is precarious enough after yesterday." "I don't care what people think," she replied with more bravado than she felt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You should." He gestured toward the path back to town. "Go on, I'll wait until you're out of sight." Zara took a few steps, then turned back. "Mr. Byrne," he raised an eyebrow in question, "thank you for telling me the truth." For the second time, she offered him a genuine smile, not out of pity or fear, but understanding. And for the second time, she witnessed that momentary softening of his features, that glimpse of the man he might have been under different circumstances. As she hurried back to her worried father, Zara knew something had shifted in Skidoo. The whispers about Xander Byrne had already begun to change, no longer exclusively tales of violence, but now including the story of how he'd helped tend the wounded deputies. Of how Zara Ellis, the Boston newcomer, had smiled at him and lived to tell the tale. What Zara couldn't know was that her simple act of kindness, that genuine smile, offered without expectation or fear, had breached walls Xander had spent years building around himself. Walls he had believed impenetrable. And that breach, small though it was, would change everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Skidoo experienced a subtle but significant shift. Xander Byrne still rode into town periodically for supplies, his presence still causing a ripple of tension. But now, instead of emptying the streets, his arrival merely dampened conversations. People watched him with caution rather than terror, some even nodding in acknowledgement when he passed. And Zara noticed that his routes through town increasingly brought him past the general store. The third time this happened, Harold Ellis noticed too. "That man's taken an interest in you," he said grimly after Xander had ridden past, his eyes briefly meeting Zara's through the window. "Nothing good can come of it." "You don't know that," Zara replied, continuing to stack cans of peaches. Her father sighed heavily. "Zara, listen to me. I know you see something in him that others don't. You've always had a way of looking beyond the surface." His voice softened. "It's what made you such a comfort to your mother in her final days, but this is different. This man has blood on his hands." So do doctors, Zara countered, then immediately regretted her flippancy. I'm sorry, Father, I know you're worried, but I believe there's more to Xander Byrne than his reputation suggests. Harold studied his daughter's flushed face. You're falling for him, he said, more statement than question. No, Zara denied too quickly. I'm just interested in the truth. Everyone deserves a chance to be more than their worst mistakes. Her father looked unconvinced but let the matter drop. Zara was grateful, as she wasn't ready to examine her own feelings too closely. The connection she felt to Xander Byrne defied easy explanation. It wasn't simply attraction, though she couldn't deny his rugged good looks affected her. It was something deeper, a recognition, perhaps, of similar souls despite their vastly different lives. That evening, as Zara was locking up the store, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was unsurprised to see Xander dismounting his stallion. Mr. Byrne, she acknowledged, trying to ignore the quickening of her pulse. Miss Ellis. He removed his hat, revealing hair damp with sweat. I was hoping to catch you before you closed. Did you need supplies? She gestured toward the door. I can reopen? No. He shifted slightly, and Zara realized with astonishment that the intimidating gunslinger was nervous. I found something I thought might interest you. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Given your evident appreciation for literature. Curious, Zara unwrapped the package to find a book, a collection of Emily Dickinson's poems. Her breath caught. How did you know I like poetry? A slight shrug. I noticed you reading during your lunch breaks, the way you handled the book, like it was precious. The fact that he had been observing her closely enough to notice such details should have unsettled her. Instead, she felt a warm flutter in her chest. This is very thoughtful, thank you. Xander nodded, replacing his hat. Good evening, Miss Ellis. Wait, Zara said impulsively. Would you join my father and me for dinner tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just a simple meal. Surprise registered on his face, quickly followed by wariness. I don't think that would be wise. Because of what people might say. Because your father would likely have a heart attack, he replied dryly. Besides, I'm not exactly skilled at dinner conversation. Zara stepped closer, emboldened by his gift. Then practice with us. I promise my father will be civil. At his skeptical look, she added, eventually. For a moment it seemed he might agree. Then his expression closed, the walls visibly coming back up. Another time, perhaps. He mounted his horse with fluid grace. Enjoy the book, Miss Ellis. As he rode away, Zara hugged the poetry collection to her chest, simultaneously disappointed and intrigued. The fearsome Xander Byrne had bought her a book of poems. Whatever his reputation, whatever blood stained his past, there was a depth to him that few had bothered to discover. She determined then that she would be the one to do so. The following Sunday, Zara attended the small wooden church on the edge of town with her father. Pastor Williams preached about redemption, a topic that seemed particularly relevant given her recent encounters. As the congregation filed out after the service, she noticed a solitary figure standing beneath a pine tree some distance away. Xander, watching the churchgoers with an unreadable expression. Without thinking, she changed direction, ignoring her father's call and the stares of the other parishioners. You didn't come in, she said when she reached him. Xander's eyes flicked to the church. I don't think I'd be welcome. God doesn't turn anyone away, a sardonic lift of his eyebrow. God might not. Pastor Williams is another matter. Zara couldn't argue with that. The pastor had been particularly vocal in his disapproval of Xander Byrne. Then why come at all? He hesitated, as though weighing his words. I used to attend every Sunday before he became the town's boogeyman, he meant. Before he'd killed 6 men and earned a reputation as someone to be feared rather than welcomed. You could again, she suggested gently. A humorless smile touched his lips. Some stains don't wash out, Miss Ellis, not even in holy water. She wanted to argue, to tell him that redemption was possible for anyone who sought it. But her father was approaching, his face a mask of concern, and several other townspeople had stopped to watch the exchange. Zara, Harold called, his voice strained. It's time to go home. With an apologetic smile to Xander, she rejoined her father. As they walked back toward town, she was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them, the speculative glances thrown her way. "This has to stop," Harold said once they were out of earshot of the others. "These public conversations with Byrne, they're becoming the talk of Skidoo." "Let them talk," Zara replied, though a part of her knew her father was right. In a town this size, reputation was everything, especially for a woman on her own. If her father's health continued to deteriorate as the doctor predicted, she would need the community's goodwill to maintain the store. To survive. But something about Xander Byrne called to her, making her willing to risk the disapproval of Skidoo's citizens. There was a wounded soul beneath that dangerous exterior, one that responded to her kindness like a plant turning toward the sun. The opportunity to explore that connection further came sooner than expected. 3 days later, a stage robbery outside of town left the driver wounded and the passengers shaken. More concerning were the descriptions of the bandits, 5 masked men who had mentioned plans to hit the bank in Skidoo next. Sheriff Miller called an emergency town meeting at the saloon. Zara and her father attended, along with most of Skidoo's citizens. The sheriff's plan was straightforward: form a volunteer posse to patrol the town and surrounding area until the bandits were captured or moved on. "We need men who can handle themselves in a fight," Miller announced, surveying the crowd. "This gang isn't afraid to use violence." From the back of the room, a deep voice spoke. "You need someone who knows how they think." The crowd parted as Xander Byrne stepped forward, his presence creating an immediate hush. He rarely attended town gatherings, making his appearance all the more striking. Sheriff Miller's face reddened. "We don't need your kind of help, Byrne, don't you?" Xander replied evenly. "These men have killed 2 stagecoach drivers between here and Carson City. Your deputies barely know which end of a gun to hold." A murmur ran through the crowd, partly indignation at the insult to the deputies, partly acknowledgement of the truth in Xander's words. Miller's face grew redder still. "I know how men like this operate," Xander continued. "I know where they'll set up, how they'll approach the bank, and I'm offering my assistance." Before Miller could refuse again, Mayor Peterson spoke up. "Perhaps we should consider Mr. Byrne's offer. These are desperate times." More murmurs, now tinged with reluctant agreement. Even those who feared Xander had to admit his skills might be exactly what the town needed. From her position near the front, Zara studied the interplay with fascination. For the first time, the citizens of Skidoo were looking at Xander Byrne not as a threat, but as a potential protector. And Xander, despite his carefully maintained expression of indifference, seemed affected by this shift in perception. "Fine," Miller conceded gruffly. "But you follow my orders, Byrne. This is still my town." Xander nodded once. "I'll scout the surrounding area tomorrow. These men will have a hideout within a day's ride." As the meeting dispersed, Zara found herself standing near the saloon doors as Xander exited. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a small smile of encouragement. To her surprise, he paused beside her. "Be careful over the next few days," he said quietly. "Keep the store closed if you can." "Are they really that dangerous?" she asked, a grim nod. "They've killed for less than what's in your father's safe." The genuine concern in his voice warmed her despite the ominous warning. "We'll be careful, will you?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise at her concern, perhaps. "Always am." Over the next 2 days, Skidu existed in a state of tense anticipation. Men patrolled the streets in pairs, businesses closed early, and the bank moved most of its cash to a hidden location. Xander returned from his scouting mission with news that confirmed their fears. He'd found tracks and campfire remains, suggesting a large group was hiding in the foothills, likely preparing for the raid. Sheriff Miller positioned men around the town, with Xander taking the most exposed position at the edge of town, where the main road curved around a rocky outcropping, the perfect spot for an ambush. On the 3rd day, around noon, Zara was helping her father inventory ammunition when the first shots rang out. Harold immediately locked the store's front door while Zara rushed to the window. "Get away from there," her father shouted, but Zara was transfixed by the scene unfolding in the street. 5 riders had entered town, guns blazing, heading straight for the bank. From his position at the outcropping, Xander emerged, firing with deadly accuracy. 2 bandits fell immediately while the others scattered, returning fire. Bullets shattered windows and splintered wood as the gunfight intensified. Sheriff Miller and his deputies joined the fray from their positions, but it was clear that Xander was the bandits' primary target. He moved with remarkable speed, using the limited cover available, each of his shots finding its mark. Suddenly, Zara spotted a 6th rider who had circled around behind the buildings. He was positioned on a rooftop across the street, taking aim at Xander's exposed back. Without thinking, she unlocked the door and ran outside. "Xander, behind you," she screamed. He spun at her voice, firing upward just as the rooftop bandit pulled his trigger. Both men were hit, the bandit tumbling from the roof, Xander staggering backward before regaining his footing. The remaining bandits, seeing their advantage lost, attempted to flee. They didn't make it far. Within minutes, the gunfire ceased, leaving the street littered with bodies and the air thick with smoke. Zara rushed to where Xander stood, one hand pressed against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "You're hurt," she gasped. "It's nothing," he replied, though his face had paled beneath its tan. "What were you thinking, coming outside like that? He would have killed you," she said simply. Something in his expression shifted, a realization, perhaps, that someone cared whether he lived or died. Before he could respond, Sheriff Miller approached, his own arm bleeding from a bullet graze. "Well, Byrne," he said gruffly, "seems we owe you our thanks." Xander nodded, his eyes still on Zara. "Miss Ellis deserves your gratitude as well. She saved my life." Miller looked between them, clearly noting the way they stood close together, the concern evident in Zara's face. "Doc Simmons will want to see to that wound," he said finally. "Town council's meeting tonight. I expect they'll want to properly thank you both." As the sheriff walked away to coordinate the cleanup, Xander swayed slightly. Zara immediately moved to support him, heedless of the blood staining her dress or the stares of the townspeople. "Lean on me," she insisted. "We need to get you to the doctor." To her surprise, he complied, allowing her to help him toward the doctor's office. As they walked, she felt his breath warm against her ear. "Thank you," he murmured. "Not many would have risked themselves for me." "I'm not many," she replied softly. His low chuckle sent a shiver down her spine. "No, Zara Ellis, you most certainly are not." It was the first time he'd used her first name. Doc Simmons determined that the bullet had grazed Xander's ribs without causing serious damage. He cleaned and bandaged the wound, recommending rest advice that Xander predictably ignored. By evening, he was at the town council meeting, standing straight despite the pain Zara knew he must be feeling. Mayor Peterson presented both Xander and Zara with the town's gratitude, announcing that the reward money for the bandits would be split between them. The citizens of Skidoo, who had until recently crossed the street to avoid Xander Byrne, now approached to shake his hand, to thank him personally for protecting their town. Zara watched the transformation with a sense of vindication. She had seen beyond his fearsome reputation, had recognized the good man beneath the hardened exterior. Now, others were beginning to see it too. After the meeting, as the townspeople dispersed into the warm summer night, Xander approached her. "Walk with me," he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Despite her father's worried frown, Zara nodded. They strolled slowly down Main Street, an unusual pair, the feared gunslinger and the Eastern shopkeeper's daughter. But for once, the stares that followed them held curiosity rather than judgment. "Everything's changing," Xander said after they had walked in companionable silence for several minutes. "Because of you." "Because of what you did today," Zara corrected. "You protected the town." "I wouldn't have been here to do it if not for you." He stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. "You saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. When you smiled at me that first day, it was like being seen for the first time in years." The naked honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "I just saw you as a person, not a legend." "That's exactly it." His hand rose, hesitating briefly before gently touching her cheek. "You make me want to be worthy of the way you look at me." Zara leaned into his touch, her heart racing. You already are. For a moment, it seemed he might kiss her. Then, with visible effort, he lowered his hand and stepped back. Your father is watching from the store. Zara glanced over her shoulder to see Harold Ellis indeed standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. He's worried, she admitted. He thinks you're dangerous. He's right, Xander replied softly. But not to you, never to you. The intensity in his eyes left no doubt as to his meaning. Whatever darkness existed in his past, whatever violence he was capable of, Zara Ellis had nothing to fear from him. Come to dinner tomorrow, she said impulsively. Please, let my father see what I see. After a moment's hesitation, Xander nodded. For you, I'll try. The dinner the following evening began awkwardly, with Harold Ellis maintaining a stiff politeness that barely masked his disapproval. Xander, for his part, seemed uncomfortable in the domestic setting, his usual confidence diminished by the unfamiliar territory of social niceties. But Zara's determined efforts to bridge the gap between the two men gradually bore fruit. By the time they reached dessert, Zara's apple pie, the conversation had moved from stilted pleasantries to a genuine discussion about the future of Skidoo now that the bandit threat had been eliminated. Town's changing, Harold observed, pouring coffee. Mining's slowing down, but the railway spur line they're building could bring new opportunities. If it ever gets finished, Xander replied, the terrain's challenging. You know about railway construction, Harold asked, surprise evident in his voice. A shadow crossed Xander's face. My father was a railway man, worked the lines across 3 states before he was killed in a tunnel collapse. This personal revelation offered so casually seemed to shift something in Harold's perception. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. How old were you? 12, just my mother and me after that, until the consumption took her when I was 18. Xander's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. That's when I headed west. The conversation continued, more personal now, with Harold sharing stories of his late wife and their life in Boston. Zara watched with growing hope as the 2 most important men in her life found common ground. Both had known loss. Both had sought new beginnings in the West. Both cared deeply for her in their different ways. As Xander prepared to leave, Harold surprised both him and Zara by extending his hand. You're welcome in our home, Mr. Byrne, he said, his earlier hostility noticeably diminished. Though I expect your intentions toward my daughter are honorable. Xander's eyes met Zara's briefly before he clasped Harold's hand. Completely honorable, sir. After Xander had gone, Harold sat heavily in his armchair, studying his daughter's flushed face. You love him, he stated simply. Zara couldn't deny it. Yes, her father sighed. He's not the man I would have chosen for you. His past is past, she interrupted gently. Can't you see who he is now, who he's trying to be? Harold was quiet for a long moment. I see a man with blood on his hands, he finally said, but I also see a man who would die to protect you, who looks at you like you're his salvation. He reached for her hand. Your mother would say that's worth something. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. Thank you, father. Don't thank me yet, he warned, though his tone was lighter. I still expect a proper courtship, and he'll need to prove himself to more than just us if he plans to make a life here. Over the following weeks, Xander did exactly that. He helped the sheriff track down a cattle rustler who'd been plaguing local ranchers. He assisted the stagecoach company in establishing safer routes. When a fire broke out in the livery stable, he led efforts to prevent it from spreading to neighboring buildings. Gradually, the fear that had once surrounded him was replaced by respect, even admiration. Children who had previously been warned to stay away from him now waved when he passed. Shopkeepers welcomed him rather than tensing at his arrival, and through it all, his relationship with Zara deepened. They took evening walks together, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes simply enjoying each other's presence. He brought her books from his own collection, volumes of poetry and philosophy that revealed the depth of his self-education. She taught him to dance in the privacy of her father's parlor, laughing at his initial clumsiness until he caught the rhythm. The first time he kissed her was on a crisp autumn evening, the mountains surrounding Skidoo already dusted with early snow. They had walked to their spot by the creek, now their established refuge from the town's curious eyes. "I've been thinking," Xander said, his breath visible in the cool air. "About the future." Zara looked up at him, admiring the way the setting sun gilded his features. "What about it? For a long time I didn't think I had one," he admitted, "or deserved one. I existed day to day, expecting that eventually my past would catch up with me." She took his hand, entwining their fingers. And now, his eyes, usually so guarded, were open and vulnerable as they met hers. "Now I find myself hoping, planning, wanting things I never thought possible." He drew a deep breath. "Because of you, Zara. You smiled at me that day in the store, and it was like spring after a lifetime of winter." Moved by his words, Zara reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar that had once seemed so intimidating but now was simply part of the man she loved. "I think I fell in love with you that day," she confessed. "I saw something in your eyes that called to me." "Pain," he suggested with a self-deprecating smile. "Goodness," she corrected firmly. "Hidden beneath layers of pain and regret, but still there." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You see the best in me. You make me want to be that man, the one you believe I can be." "You already are," she whispered. When he lowered his mouth to hers, it felt like the most natural conclusion to their journey from fear to understanding, from understanding to respect, from respect to love. His kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but deepened as she responded with all the emotion she'd been holding back. When they finally separated, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Zara Ellis." The words, spoken with such simple certainty, filled her with joy. "And I love you, Xander Byrne." They returned to town hand in hand, no longer concerned about who might see or what they might think. Skidu had witnessed their story unfold, had seen how Zara's belief in Xander had transformed not just him, but the town's perception of him. Her smile had started a chain reaction that few could have predicted. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, Skidu experienced another unprecedented event. Xander Byrne attended church. He sat beside Zara and her father, ignoring the initial stares and whispers, his attention focused on Pastor Williams's sermon about redemption. After the service, the pastor approached, extending his hand to Xander. "Good to have you with us, Mr. Byrne." "Thank you, Pastor," Xander replied, accepting the handshake. "It's been too long." "The Lord's house is always open to those who seek him," Williams said, his initial wariness giving way to genuine welcome, "even those who have wandered far from the path." "Especially those," Zara added, squeezing Xander's arm supportively. As they walked home, Harold Ellis lagged slightly behind the couple, observing their easy interaction. The way Xander's hand rested protectively at the small of Zara's back, the way her face lit up when she looked at him. "My daughter seems to have tamed the most dangerous man in Nevada," he remarked that evening as Xander prepared to leave. Xander shook his head. "Not tamed, sir, saved." Harold studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when Zara first smiled at you, this whole town thought she was either brave or foolish. Turns out she was just right." He cleared his throat. "I won't be around forever. My heart's not what it was. It gives me peace to know she'll be looked after." The implied blessing wasn't lost on Xander. "I'd like to ask for her hand, sir, properly." Harold nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I expect you would, and I expect she'd say yes." He sighed. "Her mother would have liked you, I think, once she got past the gunslinger reputation." "High praise indeed," Xander said with genuine appreciation. "Thank you." A week later, on a clear winter morning, Xander took Zara riding in the foothills above Skidu. The landscape was transformed by a recent snowfall, pristine and peaceful beneath the Nevada sun. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the valley, the town visible as a cluster of buildings nestled between the mountains. Helping Zara dismount, Xander led her to a fallen log cleared of snow. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the vista. "I never imagined Nevada could be so breathtaking." "Neither did I," he replied, though his eyes were on her, not the landscape. Zara, there's something I need to ask you. Her heart quickened as he knelt before her, snow soaking into his trousers. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. When I came to Skidoo, I was running from my past, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. I never expected to find a future. Then you smiled at me, really smiled, not out of fear or obligation, but with genuine kindness, and everything changed. He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small diamond. I know I'm not the man your parents would have chosen. I've done things I can never undo, but I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of your love. Will you marry me, Zara Ellis? Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Xander Byrne, I will marry you. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then he rose to kiss her a kiss full of promise and future and healing. 3 months later, Skidoo witnessed yet another transformation. The small church was filled to capacity as Xander Byrne and Zara Ellis exchanged vows. Pastor Williams presided, his initial reservations about the reformed gunslinger long since replaced by genuine respect. Harold Ellis, weakened by his heart condition but determined to walk his daughter down the aisle, beamed with pride as he placed Zara's hand in Xander's. The bride wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by Widow Jenkins, who had become one of the couple's strongest supporters. Sheriff Miller attended with his wife, as did Mayor Peterson and virtually every other resident of Skidoo. Even a few miners who had known Xander in his darker days came to witness the union, marveling at the change in the man they had once feared. As the newlyweds exited the church to a shower of rice and well wishes, Zara looked up at her husband. They're all smiling at you now, she observed, not just me. Xander's arm tightened around her waist. Because you taught them how, you showed them that people can change, that I could change. You did the changing, she corrected. I just believed it was possible. Sometimes that's all it takes, he murmured, bending to kiss her as the citizens of Skidoo cheered their approval. In the years that followed, Xander and Zara Byrne became pillars of the Skidoo community. When Harold Ellis passed peacefully 6 months after their wedding, they took over the general store, expanding it to meet the needs of the growing town. Xander occasionally assisted the sheriff when his particular skills were needed, but his gun spent more time in a drawer than on his hip. 2 years after their wedding, Zara gave birth to twins, a boy they named Harold Xavier Byrne after her father, and a girl they called Emily Zora Byrne, honoring both Zara's favorite poet and Xander's mother. The children grew up knowing their father not as the fearsome gunslinger of legend, but as a gentle, thoughtful man who read them poetry at bedtime and taught them to respect all living things. Sometimes, visitors to Skidoo would hear whispered stories about Xander Byrne's past, how he had once been the most feared man in Nevada, how a single smile from the Boston shopkeeper's daughter had started his redemption. Most assumed the tales were exaggerated, the stuff of frontier legend. After all, the man who ran the general store, who taught Sunday school, who served on the town council, how could he possibly have been the deadly gunman of those stories? But the old-timers would just smile knowingly. They remembered. They had witnessed the transformation firsthand. They had seen how fear had given way to respect, and respect to admiration. On the 20th anniversary of their first meeting, Xander took Zara back to the creek where they had shared so many important moments. Both were older now, silver threading his dark hair, laugh lines framing her still bright eyes, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked as they sat side by side on their favorite rock. "Tying your life to mine." Zara shook her head, reaching for his hand, a hand that had once dealt death but had spent the last 2 decades building, creating, nurturing. "Never, not for a single moment." "I was thinking about that first day," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "about your smile. Do you know what I saw in it?" "What?" "Hope," he said simply. "When you smiled at me without fear, it was the first time in years I believed I might be more than my mistakes, that I might have a future worth living." Zara leaned against his shoulder, content, and what a future it's been. As the sun set over Skidoo, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and crimson, Xander Byrne held his wife close. Once, he had been a man defined by violence, isolated by fear. Now, he was defined by love, the love of the woman who had seen beyond his fearsome reputation, the love of their children, the respect of a community that had come to value him not for his skill with a gun, but for his character. All because Zara Ellis had smiled at him, without fear, without judgment, a simple act of kindness that had changed everything. In the years to come, the story would be passed down in Skidoo how the town's most feared resident had been transformed by a smile, how redemption could come from the most unexpected sources. It would become part of the town's identity, a testament to the power of seeing beyond appearances, of believing in the possibility of change. And whenever someone new arrived in town, whenever they heard the whispered legend of Xander Byrne, the deadly gunslinger, who became a respected citizen, they would inevitably ask, how could one smile change a man so completely? Those who knew the couple best would always give the same answer: it wasn't just any smile. It was a smile that saw not who he had been, but who he could become. A smile that offered not just acceptance, but the promise of something he had never expected to find: a home, a family, a future. A smile that had shown a feared and lonely man that the path to redemption began with being truly seen.